My name is Lana, and I'm a fan of sensual stories and explicit movies. I've put together a collection of the best stories that I'm sharing with you. Now, we're going to listen to a very special one. Let's go!
It was 4 months ago when my new neighbors moved in. I was used to the neighboring house being empty since the previous occupants had moved out a few months earlier, which was no big loss because I never got on with them. That family seemed to think I was to blame for my wife leaving me, despite everyone else knowing it was my wife who had the affair and left me. So it was good to have an empty house next to mine, but even better when the new neighbors moved in. I went out to meet John and Debbie Russell when they first arrived, and we seemed to get on well. Although that wasn't too much of a surprise because they are in their mid-40s, which is about the same age as me. John had obviously spent too much time drinking beer and not enough time exercising, unlike me, because he had a substantial punch. Debbie, however, was still quite a looker and must have been quite a catch for John. She looked much younger than her actual 43. She had a lovely lithe figure and her soft blonde hair was worn long to her shoulders. However, it was John and Debbie's daughter who got most of my attention when she arrived the following day after they moved in. Cindy was just a couple of months past her 18th birthday and was an incredibly excited yet innocent looking girl. She was blonde like her mother and wore wonderfully light and short skirts that showed off her long, smooth legs. Cindy was really pretty with her mother's blue eyes, and her tight tops clearly demonstrated that she had young and firm breasts. Having the Russells moved in next to me was good. And whilst it was fun to watch both Debbie and Cindy come and go, I didn't intend to have a relationship with either of them, despite my wife leaving me over a year ago. They did make for good dreams, though. So I didn't really expect to have anything more than a neighborly relationship with them. You know, the sort of thing, looking after the house when they're on holiday, taking out their rubbish bins when they forget, and taking delivery of parcels if they're out. These all changed 3 months after the Russells had moved in. It was about 8 p.m. and I was just finishing up some work I had brought home when my doorbell rang. When I answered my door, I was surprised to find Cindy standing there, and she was obviously upset. Her eyes were red and slightly puffy, and she seemed out of breath. However, this was at complete odds with the rest of her look. She was dressed up to be obviously sexy. Her long blonde hair cascaded from her head to just below her shoulders, and she was wearing a tight blouse with the top 2 buttons undone, revealing her ample cleavage and the hint of a white lace bra. Her skirt was one of her favorite short flowing skirts that stopped a few inches above her knees. Her legs were bare, and she was wearing some expensive-looking white high-heel shoes. I realized I was staring for too long and looking up and down at her excited body, but she didn't seem to notice. Cindy just stood there looking upset. "Hello, Cindy. What's up?" I asked the not very original line. "Would you like to come in?" "Yes, please, Mr. Matthews," she quickly answered. "I'm locked out of my house. Mom and Dad are out until later, and I don't have my key." I gestured for her to come into the house, and I led her through the kitchen, where I also keep a wooden dining table and chairs, which I use when I'm eating on my own. My work papers were spread across the table, so I quickly pushed them into a pile and dumped them on the side. "Let me get you a drink, Cindy, and please sit down." "Thank you, Mr. Matthews. I really need a drink. Can I have a coffee?" She seemed to calm me down a bit now, although I was feeling a bit awkward with the obviously sexy young girl in my house, especially because she had figured in so many of my dreams and fantasies. I turned round and started to make the coffee for Cindy whilst trying to find out what was wrong with her tonight. How come you don't have your key, Cindy? Oh, I wasn't going to be home so early because I'd gone out to a party and my parents weren't picking me up until 11, but I had to leave early. Why did you have to leave? I asked her. Oh, boyfriend trouble. It is just. And she left her sentence hanging in the air. The way she said it suggested to me that she wanted someone to talk to. And while I didn't really want to talk about her boyfriend, I thought I ought to at least help my neighbor's daughter. Here is your coffee, Cindy. And have you told your parents that you left the party early? No, not yet. She grasped the coffee mug and cupped her hands round it, warming them up. I noticed that she had painted her fingernails a bright red. Let me call them and let them know you're here. Then they can come home back and get you. I went into the hall and found John's mobile number and gave him a call. I explained what had happened and that I didn't know why Cindy had left early, but that I could look after Cindy until they come home later. John was happy with that because they had gone out for a meal at some friends, and by the sound of it, John was taking the chance to drink lots of someone else's beer. I returned to the kitchen where Cindy was still sitting, sipping slowly at her coffee. She had her back to me, so I paused for a moment to watch her. She was slightly bent forward over my table with her long, glistening blonde hair cascading from her head. I smiled as one of my dreams popped back into my head, and I felt my D swelling. But then I remembered that this was real and I'd better help her. I spoke to your father and they will be back just after 11. I said you would be okay here until then. I hope you don't mind. She turned round as I walked across the room and leaned against the kitchen counter facing her. Sure, thanks, Mr. Matthews. You said something about boyfriend trouble. Do you want to talk about it? I asked, hoping that she would say no and we could go and watch TV or something. She looked thoughtful for a moment, holding the white coffee mug close to her soft red lips, and then I noticed a small tear forming in the corner of her gorgeous eyes. She looked up at me. Can I talk to you, Mr. Matthews? It's just that I can't talk to my parents. It is too embarrassing. You won't tell them, will you? Her eyes were glistening as they filled with tears, and there was a small sob as she seemed to plead with me. Cindy, of course you can talk to me. I'll do what I can, but it has been a long time since I've been out on a date. I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. I knew it would all be about love or having a crush, which are not my favorite topics. Mike, my boyfriend, he tried to touch me tonight. You know, he put his hand in my bra and touched my breasts, even my mamilas. But I don't want that. It didn't feel right. Now I was interested, and I thought, lucky Mike for getting a feel, but out loud I said, why do you think it didn't feel right? Well, you see, Mr. Matthews. She paused, and I saw that her cheeks were growing red. She was blushing. She started again, averting her eyes. Well, you see, I'm not a virgin. I did make love once, about a year ago, but it was awful. The boy at the time was horrible. It hurt, and I felt so cheap afterward. I hated it, and I don't want to do that again. I don't want another boy doing that to me. She sobbed as she spoke, her head bowed and obviously upset by the memory of her first time. I moved from the counter to the table and pulled out the chair opposite Cindy and sat down slowly while I tried to think what I should say. Cindy, I'm so sorry you had a bad experience, but lovemaking doesn't have to be like that. It shouldn't hurt. It should be pleasurable, wonderful, and exciting. It just sounds like you had a bad first time. Don't worry, it won't always be like that. Cindy looked up at me and brushed the tears from her soft red cheeks. I wanted to reach out and hold her, but didn't want to scare her. She said, "But my friends say all boys are like that." That's just because they're boys and they haven't had the experience to know what it takes to make sure a girl enjoys lovemaking. They will learn and you will enjoy it later. Do you know how to make it enjoyable? She suddenly asked. I jumped at her question, all sorts of fantasies going through my head while I wondered what she meant. She must have seen my shock because she added, "Sorry, Mr. Matthews, I just hate to think it will never feel good, that I will always be frightened of a man's touch. I didn't mean anything by my question." I paused while I thought. I looked at pretty young Cindy sitting across the table from me, her ample breasts pushing against her silk blouse, and my eyes were drawn to the soft skin of her cleavage. I made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this opportunity go to waste. She might be tired, sad, and vulnerable, but all that meant was that I now was the time to seduce this lovely girl. My D stirred at the thought of taking Cindy, but I knew I had to get this right because I didn't want my neighbors angry at me. I'll get her to keep it secret, and anyway, if I got to make love this gorgeous, blonde 18-year-old, it would be worth any problems later. I stood up and moved a couple of steps around the table, standing next to Cindy, and looked down at her. I had a good view down her excited cleavage as I said, "Boys just take it too fast, and all they are interested in is getting to a girl's penis. But men know how to relax a girl without it leading to anything. I'll show you." I finished my sentence as a question to see if she hesitated, but she didn't say anything, just cupped her drink in her hands and continued looking into it. I moved behind her and I gently stroked her shoulders, rubbing her tense muscles. I didn't get much response at first, and I could feel her holding her shoulders tight and not relaxing at all. Slowly, however, I could feel her shoulders starting to move and relax, and then I heard the click as she placed her cup on the table in front of her. While I massaged her shoulders, I bent and pulled her silky blonde hair back from her soft neck before placing my lips against her lovely sweet tasting skin. I heard her soft moan when I kissed her, and I could feel a sudden drop in her shoulders as she relaxed. I spent a few minutes kissing her neck and nibbling at her ears. All the time I could hear her breath getting slower as she relaxed under my ministrations. Now that she was relaxed, I intended on getting her turned on. Slowly, I started to rub lower down her front, tracing the contour of her bra under her top, and I felt her body start to tremble. I held my breath, and without pausing, I deftly undid the button of her blouse, and then the next one. Cindy didn't stop me. Continuing down, I undid all remaining buttons on her sleek blouse, and I returned to stroking her soft and sensitive skin. I drifted my hand across her breast, and I felt her stiff mamillas through the thin material of her white lace bra. Her breathing started to get quicker when I touched her breasts, and I guessed she liked them being touched and was anticipating what was going to happen just as I was. Taking my chance, I swiveled the chair in which she was sitting so that she was no longer facing the table and I stood in front of her. She had her eyes averted, looking down as if she was still not sure about what was going on. I looked down at her beautiful body and saw the soft skin of her cleavage and the young breasts encased by the lace bra.
Then comes a too explicit part, which I skip because of YouTube restrictions. You can find out how to listen to the extended version of the story in the description below, or by watching a separate short video on my channel. The link is on the screen in the upper right corner. And now we continue.
"Quick, Cindy, we must clean up," I said, pointing to the clock when she looked around. She had a dreamy look on her face and wasn't moving very fast, but I got her to put her panties back on to stop any more fluid leaking from her, and I helped her button up her blouse so that her tits were covered again. Taking a hairbrush from her bag, she slowly brushed her hair while I made myself presentable. All the time she seemed to be watching me, a sparkle in her eye. Just then the doorbell rang, and I quickly looked around my kitchen, and I saw some of our glistening juices on the chair and floor, which might give the game anyway. "Come on, Cindy, there will be your parents." And I grabbed her hand, leading her into the hall. Just before I got to the door, Cindy stopped me and faced me and surprised me by kissing me hard, her tongue seeking out my own in my mouth. Almost at once, she backed off and exclaimed, "Thanks, Mr. Matthews. That was the best night ever." Stunned for a moment, she turned around and opened the door to her parents. Cindy immediately walked out, telling her parents how helpful I had been and that I had been a true gentleman to her. I could barely look her parents in the eye as they thanked me and left to take their 18-year-old daughter home, little knowing that her young tight kitty was full of my worm. I closed the door as they left and let out a big sigh as I realized how close I had come to be caught lovemaking their daughter. But then my lips turned into a big grin as I recalled the evening's events and the feeling of being kissed by Cindy and the amazing loving of her young body. I hoped she would be back for more.